We're here at the Golden Door. I'm Kathy Van Ness, and I'm so happy to be sitting with here Sagi Kfir. If I've said that correctly, I'm going to just introduce you. Space lawyers are a thing, and we are talking to one tonight about the future of cosmic mining. Imagine this. This is actually going on right now. Sagi Kfir serves as General Counsel, Corporate Secretary, and co-founder for Deep Space Industries. Deep Space Industries is an asteroid mining company, changing the economics of the space industry by providing the tools needed to prospect, harvest, manufacture, and market in-space resources. Such an incredibly big thought. These resources are found on easily accessible near-Earth asteroids, and they provide unlimited energy and supplies for a growing space economy. In 1967, the Outer Space Treaty was drafted, stating that nations can't own territories in space. But unknowns to even myself, after doing some research here, in 2015, President Barack Obama signed legislation, amazing, huh, that this would just even happen, that allows commercial extraction of minerals and other materials, including water, from asteroids and the moon. The U.S. Commercial Space Launch Competitive Act of 2015 says that any materials that American individuals or companies find on an asteroid or moon is theirs to keep. And they do. So our first question of today is, outside of America, how many countries are working in this field today?
That's a great question. So I would say up until November of last year, when CSLCA was passed, nobody was working on it other than the United States. And even within the United States, it took us a little bit of time to build a little traction with Congress to put this law together. Now that the law was passed in November, it raised the eyebrows of the world in general. So the idea of mining asteroids or mining things in space, whether it's on the moon, a celestial body, or something smaller, has been around since we've flown to space in the 60s, right in the beginning. But it was always academic. Now that there's actually an industry, an indigenous industry in the United States, there's only 2 companies for asteroid mining in the United States. Now that we've started gaining traction and we passed a law, the government of Luxembourg actually got really interested in doing the same thing. And now that Luxembourg is getting involved, there are other nations that are very interested in it. So some are not publicly talking about it. Luxembourg is publicly talking about it. They just talked about it last month, or actually in January. So now we have Luxembourg, we have the United States, Canada's interested in it, and also other nations in Europe. So,
wow.
So really we're talking about less than 5 publicly.
And well, I'm going to ask this question in different ways at different times, but I'm going to go ahead and put it out there now. I mean, asteroids are sort of moving
pretty quickly
out there.
Yeah, they're fast.
I mean, they kind of are fast.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, and like, whose is it? It's like mine, it's yours. How do you stake your flag in it? It's, I ask the real questions that I would be thinking. I mean, how can you tell it's your asteroid?
Well, we're not staking any flag, right? I'm on camera here, so I got to be careful.
Do you know what I'm saying, though? Like,
yeah.
how, if so many countries are going to go after that market, which sounds, you see the research here, it's pretty interesting.
Yeah.
Who is really owning it? There goes that legal story.
So that's a great question. I'll break it up in a couple of ways of answering that. So how many asteroids are there to go after? Well, we know for near-Earth asteroids, what we call NEAs take less energy to get to than to get to the moon. And there are millions of them. Some of them orbit between the Earth and the moon. Some of them are near the moon. Some of them are near Earth. There are millions of them. We know of 15,000.
Okay, that's enough to start.
That's plenty to start. That'll keep us occupied for the next, 100 years at least. That's plenty. That's fine. So we know of 15,000 that are NEAs. Once we actually get to these asteroids, no one's actually staking a flag on it. And the reason for that is the Outer Space Treaty of 1967. The Outer Space Treaty is really it's the Magna Carta of space law. It's the Constitution of space law. It's still valid today, and about, I think, 130-something odd nations have signed up to it.
Well, so could 2 countries mine on the same asteroid?
Well, we don't know just yet. We don't know just yet because it also depends on how large these asteroids are. Some of them are no larger than 1 meter, 3 feet. Some of them are 10,000 meters in length. So once we actually get there, because Article 2 of the Outer Space Treaty says no appropriation of any celestial body, including the moon. So that really means that you can't plant a flag on it and say, this piece of real estate is mine. You can't do that. Nobody can do that, whether it's a nation or a private entity. But what it doesn't forbid is extraction of the material that's on the asteroid. So think of it this way. When a fishing trawler goes out to the ocean and it's catching fish, it's not claiming the territory of the ocean. Whatever fish it catches, they claim ownership over. That's personal property. It's kind of like what we call chattel in the legal world. It's movable. So it's the same thing with asteroids. The asteroid itself is real property that nobody can claim. But the material that you take off the asteroids, just like fish from the ocean,
if you take it, it's yours.
then it's yours.
So as the first chief counsel of a space mining company, I think
Sounds sexy, right?
Well, I mean,
I like it.
if you came up to me and said that,
great,
I'd have to have a few days conversation, because we've been talking about this forever, about having you come here, and I've been intrigued since this. If you could give me the elevator speech of your company, what's the elevator speech?
It's a good thing I'm the lawyer and
Exactly,
not the CEO. So I could say that I don't really do elevator speeches, but I could tell you that I could tell you what we generally do. So asteroid mining is the long game. We are a spacecraft technology development company that is building the next generation of small sats, these small satellites that are no larger than the size of your laptop or twice your laptop, with very robust technologies. And those technologies and those spacecraft that we develop, we're going to sell to the commercial market that's going to be used in low Earth orbit for a variety of things. And the same spacecraft that we use for low Earth orbit, we're going to leverage that technology and go into deep space. And so we're developing the spacecraft for low Earth orbit and beyond.
Deep Space Industries was founded in 2012 with the aspiration to send spacecraft to asteroids with the ultimate goal of mining their resources and bringing them back to Earth. Are you on track? Your timing when you launched in 2012 is coming soon.
So are we on? So
do you know what I'm saying? How is your current efforts to execute that sort of 217 to 18?
Are you interested in investing? Is that is that what we're getting to?
I saw the news.
Because I have a different pitch for that.
I'm sure you do. I'm going to ask the real question. How close are you to actually achieving those goals?
So asteroid mining itself is a long game. That's going to take several years. We're launching our first spacecraft next year.
Well, that's good.
And we're excited
So the
about that.
investors are happy about that.
Investors are really happy about that. And we're testing some of the technologies that we're developing in-house. For example, water thrusters. Developing engines for small spacecraft that use water, that don't use toxic chemicals. And that's primarily because we're developing an ecosystem in space. Some of the material that's on asteroid is water ice. So you can use the material from the asteroid to actually fuel spacecraft.
Yeah.
So are we on track? We're on track.
It's like a gas station.
We're going to develop these gas stations.
I know. I found that super interesting. It's actually building a little gas station in space.
Yeah. It's nobody's necessarily going to be wearing blue uniforms and filling your gas. It's really robotic more than anything else, especially in the beginning.
Well, and that's pretty much, I'm going to sort of give you some factual information on that so you can understand what I'm saying. Deep Space is working on extracting asteroid water. Oh my gosh, what a concept, which can be split into constituent hydrogen and oxygen. Sounds very complicated, I actually understand it. These are the chief components of rocket fuel. Like, this is not an engineering question, don't panic. These mining efforts could lead to the establishment of in-space gas stations that would allow satellites and journeying space yachts, imagine this, top up their tanks. And your company isn't alone in this asteroid belt, though. Planetary Resources, it must be a chief competitor, is also announcing they're mining asteroids, backed by Google execs Larry Page, Eric Schmidt, Ross Perot Jr., James Cameron, and others. How are you going to manage the competition? What are you doing that would be different than what they're doing? Are you going to beat them to the punch?
Well, so the way I would say is, there's only two of us.
That's good.
Competition is a good thing because one company alone is an anomaly. When you have two companies, you're already in the industry. So they need us, we need them. There's millions of these asteroids. In fact, one of the reasons that Deep Space Industries is involved in the legislative and the regulatory process of developing these rules and regulations, which we already have, is that we're also involved internationally, having other countries doing the same thing. You know, it's ironic, you think that you don't want competition, but there's
Are you sharing data? Are you that kind of close competitors that you're in the game together, or are you really looking to see who's first?
Well, everybody wants to be first, right? But nobody's necessarily looking at to be the monopoly.
Right.
Sure, we'd like a dominant role in space, but we welcome their technologies, and I know that they're rooting for us as well. But we're also assisting other nations developing their laws because it's a force multiplier. Once these other nations develop their laws to develop their indigenous industry, then the technologies that they developed for asteroid mining, we could use. And they can, and vice versa.
So I'm going to jump to someplace. So as you're developing this law, and I'm going to get into this a little bit later, are you, and I know you're on forums and things like that, are you actually able to contribute to the law in the other international countries? Are you meeting with them and saying, well, let's all make sure we agree on this law? Or is that like a, not such a friendly process?
So we don't lobby internationally anybody,
Okay.
right? But we educate. So there's a difference. So we're definitely in the conversation with the country of Luxembourg. They're interested in seeing how this law developed in the United States, what we can do to assist them. I happen to know a lot of the space attorneys. We can count space attorneys on 2 or 3 hands.
Yeah.
There's not that many of us. So it's a very small field. We know who's involved in different nations in the conversation, and we're there to assist them in anything that we could do regulatorily. You also have to understand the nuance here is the United States, as a free market capitalist society, has a certain vision of what it wants to do in space. And we've always been very clear about that. The Secretary of State back in the 60s, the representative to the UN for UN COPIUS, that's the body in the UN that deals with space issues, we've made it very clear that space is meant to be a frontier that's going to be commercialized. Not necessarily because we want to commercialize it, because humanity is expanding. I mean, once upon a time, we were just in our village, and then we expanded outside our village, and we moved outside. And that's look, I mean, we're explorers, naturally, right, as humans.
Yeah.
You could pick up a phone today, and you can find any place in the world. I mean, Google Maps, there's no mystery. We have that desire to explore, so we're going to do that in space. So the United States has always made it very clear that this is what we're going to do. The other side of the Atlantic has certain views in terms of how this should progress regulatorily. Some of them would say, well, how does the United States have the authority to go at it unilaterally? We should do this under an international regime.
Right. Like who's going to own it?
Well, so they're concerned. They don't want the American cowboys going gallivanting in space and claiming everything, which is not the case. There's a certain misunderstanding and a skewed perception of America, and especially in space law. So we're working with that. We're in that heliocline between the salt water and the fresh water. There's that murky area, which we're now doing as the commercial industry starts growing, because it was non-existent a couple of years ago. As the commercial space industry starts growing, that is also going to impact the Europeans and elsewhere. And they want to know how is it going to benefit them, right? I mean, in the bottom of the day, how is this managed? How is it going to benefit them? So it's not just about passing laws. It's really about educating the world why it's important for what we're doing. What are these steps that we were taking, and what that means to humanity?
I read that you run into a certain amount of skepticism. When you tell people you're a space attorney and you're the chief counsel of an asteroid mining company, did the girls really, I mean, did you really believe that? I mean, you're married to them. I mean, did you buy into that?
It was a great pickup line. It worked for me.
That's a huge, I mean, did you know that when you first met him? Or did he have to bring that on later? I mean, how hard is it to explain to people to actually say, seriously, you are a space mining, you're a space attorney, for heaven's sake.
Yeah, I'll tell you.
I think that's a cool job. I mean, that'd be on the cool list.
I
mean, did you have to study this in school? Is there a book for this? I don't even think there is a book.
No, there's really no book right now
so you're making the books.
On space law and mining.
Aren't you making the books yourself? I mean, you'd be making your own books.
I mean, the law last year that was passed, when I say last year, the law was passed.
It's like November, right?
November 25th.
Yeah, November 25th.
So we're talking about 4 or 5 months ago.
Yeah, it's crazy.
This is a new law. And if you look at the law, it's rather thin. It was done in a way that won't over-regulate an industry that's just starting, right? So Congress did a fantastic job of really finding that line between providing enough regulation so it brings stability and clarity to our investors. You know, one of the first questions that we had from investors, top 3 questions, before this law was passed is, great, what's the regulatory regime that's going to protect my investment? How do I know that this is legal? So we had this little dance. Well, you know, Article 1 of the Outer Space Treaty says space is free for everybody to use and explore, but Article 2 says no national appropriation. So it didn't explicitly prohibit it, it didn't explicitly allow it. So that was why we passed this national legislation that comports with international law. But we're continuing to develop these regulations because we don't know what that's like. So really, I mean, when I talk to people that I'm a space attorney, after they close their jaw that's kind of open for a little bit of time, they're really interested in understanding why we mine asteroids. Why would we mine asteroids to begin with?
But that makes sense. Well, and when you think about your day as a space attorney, I'm sort of fascinated, and I hope our guests are for a second too. What is I read a little bit about your day, but let's forget the contracts and all those other things, got that. Where do you find the information to build this legal frontier when it's not really there? You're having to invent it. So where is it coming from?
A lot of it really comes from just developing it from scratch, quite frankly. Developing it from scratch, but making sure that it comports with international law, with the Outer Space Treaty in particular.
But I'm going to say this must be voluminous to develop all this legalese. I mean, finding the language and the comparables to protect assets in this new frontier. How do you get a baseline?
So we're taking baby steps. If you look at Title IV is the section within CSLCA that deals with space resource utilization. It's not a very large regulation. I mean, it's 2 pages. And it's enough to say we're going to comply with international law, that the material that we're extracting from asteroids we get to keep, and the president, within 180 days from passing this regulation, has to provide a report to Congress. And within that report, he has to tell Congress which agency is going to be responsible for this and how he complies or how it will comply with international law, especially Article 6 of the Outer Space Treaty, which requires continual supervision and authorization. So we don't know which agency is going to be responsible for us. So we're back and forth, shuttling in DC, talking to agencies to see where the natural fit would be. One possible suggestion would be the FAA. The FAA, and most people don't know, the FAA has one very small office, very, very small. It's the bastard stepchild in the FAA. It's called FAA AST. And they provide the licenses for every commercial launch. So you can't launch a commercial satellite in the United States without going to the FAA and getting a launch license and a re-entry license. So there's probably a nexus there because they deal with Department of Defense and Department of State, and so they're working with that. But in terms of the future development of that law, we're taking it step by step. We don't want to over-regulate it. We want to see how our industry develops, and Congress is really very good at listening to this.
Well, to take a different angle, asteroids contain the same thing as other rocky planets. But their resources, as you said, are much easier to access since they're not trapped in the core of the planet.
That's
right. Pretty easy to understand. What's in the middle of the Earth is floating around out there in space.
Especially heavy metals.
Right. Since the cosmic rubble contains all the resources we would ever need, how would you mine an asteroid, and how would you develop laws surrounding the mining on that asteroid? I mean, that's really what you're working on. So those are 2 kind of connected questions. Are you developing the law to protect the company if something should go wrong? Or are you developing the law to protect the assets that you're pulling off the asteroid, if that makes sense?
Yeah, no, that's a good question.
It's kind of complicated.
Yeah. I would say that we don't need to protect the material that's coming off.
Because you already got that.
We already got that covered.
That's covered.
That's taken care of. Or at least in the United States. We're going to wait to see when the UN meets over the summer what nation has an issue with the national legislation.
Carting away all the metals in the asteroids.
Right. So a lot of these questions, when people ask me about why are we getting these metals, what are you going to do with these platinum metal groups? The truth is, 95% of the material that's coming from the asteroids is not going to be brought back to Earth.
Where's it going?
It's actually going to be used to develop infrastructures in space.
Oh, to keep it.
So that's the whole point of the asteroid
You don't
mining.
have to bring it up.
That's right.
That
Gravity is tenacious. It's pretty hard to bring back a lot of material into Earth.
Yeah, it's interesting. Yeah.
So this material, so everything is on an asteroid. You've got water, you've got gases, you've got metals, platinum, gold, especially nickel and iron, and you've got carbonaceous material that you can make into plastics. With all these materials, you take, if anyone's heard of additive manufacturing, 3D printers, and you get 3D printers that are now actually being developed for micro and zero gravity. You take the asteroid, you take the material, and you break it apart, and you sift it based on the technologies that we're developing and other people are developing. Some of it goes into actual dust, some of it actually into gas. That gas becomes a solid, and you take the material and you start building platforms in space. You start developing these large
This is your building materials, technically.
It's all building materials.
Right,
the asteroid, think of it this way. As humanity expands into space, as we start exploring in deeper missions, we're going to Mars. NASA's talking about going to Mars. Elon Musk from SpaceX, Tesla, PayPal is going to Mars. They need the materials. The material here, although it's beautiful and fantastic, and I don't know how much of it was brought from actually Japan, but most of the material here was not brought from Mother England, right? It was local resources. It's the same idea, and those asteroids are the building blocks to develop these platforms in space infrastructure like habitats, like free-floating habitats, solar panels that are kilometers in length. And that's going to be used for what's called space solar satellites that are going to capture the energy of the sun, focus it, because we're talking about kilometers in length, focus it and send that energy down to Earth in a laser form for an unending amount of renewable energy.
Wow.
That's the future. That's in the next 15, 20 years.
Wow. As a member of International Institute of Space Law, which you are, as a part of the Hague Space Resource Governance and the American Boss Space Law Forum, try not to say that too fast, you are moderating many forums, and you're one of the leaders in these discussions. Give us some insight. I do a few forums myself. What are those kinds of discussions that you're having? Outside of just setting the law, what are the high-level discussions that are going on about this subject?
It's really across
I know there
the
are probably some secrets in there, but maybe there's a couple you could sneak into the golden door.
Well, we'll talk about a little bit. For example, one of the major issues in these panels is the international aspect. And like I was beginning to say before, is how does the international community jump on board with what the United States is doing? And how does the international community, especially the space law and policy international community, how do we bring them on to what's happening in the United States? Because, like I said before, there's some disagreement in terms of the legality of our national legislation that we just passed. It's very clear that it's legal, but they have a different percent. Look, there's a reason we have 9, now it's 8, but there's a reason that we generally have 9 judges on the Supreme Court. There's a human element to law. There's different interpretations of it.
How many countries are here? Is China in these forums? Is Russia in these forums? Do we go that far to go to the really aggressive?
Everybody's in these forums. Every nation participates to some degree in these forums, but generally the spacefaring nations are very interested in it because obviously they're involved in space and they already have assets in space and they know how to get to space. But there's also the lesser developed countries that are interested because they want to make sure that they're not going to be left behind. Do these resources just go to the more affluent countries? How do they share in that? And that's an important message that we're bringing across because the material that we're getting from these asteroids is not just for richer countries. It's really to develop the platform for humanity to expand and for renewable energy and for other things that we don't know just yet. And that trickles down to everybody. So these are the discussions that we're having in these international forums. And they also want to know, how is this going to be managed? If I'm a country in Europe and I'm going to pass similar legislation, how do we coordinate? Because this national legislation only deals with U.S. companies, obviously, because that's U.S. jurisdiction.
Yeah.
So how do you deal with other countries and their missions? So far, we're the only country in the world that has asteroid mining companies. So we're waiting to see what other country is going to have an indigenous industry as well.
Well, I'm going to go to an industry that's near and dear to heart, which I found absolutely fascinating. You contribute to space organizations that promote the development of human spaceflight and exploration such as the Earthlight Foundation and the New Worlds Institute. So how soon do you see consumers being able to participate in space travel? And I'm going to ask you the second question ahead, and are you planning to travel to space?
Well, I was going to answer before you even asked. I'm going to be one of the first. I mean, the reason I'm doing this is just to go to space.
Exactly.
So I'm getting my foot in the door.
You need a Golden Door representative there, I'm telling you.
You're the one.
Exactly.
Let's see what
Rita,
Greg
I'm
says.
sorry,
I don't know. I kind of see
it. How soon do you, I mean, everybody's talking about, I mean, there's so much talk is around, how much is the first flight?
It's a great question, because really this is not now necessarily about asteroid mining.
No.
This is about...
There's a whole industry.
There's an entire commercial space. Look, up until about 10 years ago, I would say, even less, space was dominated by national space agencies, NASA. The Soviets had their own, now Russians have Roscosmos. Chinese, Europe has the European Space Agency. So when people talk about space, especially when I tell people I'm a space attorney in the commercial, their jaw drops not just because I look like a freak when I talk about it, but they just don't see what their connection is to space. It's a movie. Yeah. You know, it's astronauts doing this. So what does it mean to an average citizen in terms of their connection to space? So 10 years ago, it was really just relegated to national agencies. Now, you have what's called the new space industry. Now you have commercial industry growing, such as Elon Musk. SpaceX.
Have you been there?
To Hawthorne, the Hawthorne facility.
Oh my gosh, in the middle of nowhere in LA are these rockets.
It's amazing. And
it's amazing.
He's building everything in-house. You know, one thing we say is hands down to Elon Musk has been the disruptor for the commercial space industry. I mean, look, it's not just Elon Musk. You got Elon Musk, right? Yeah. You have Jeff Bezos. Most of us know who Jeff Bezos is. He's got his own rocket company called Blue Origin.
Yeah.
You've got Paul Allen from Microsoft, Stratolaunch. You've got Richard Branson in Virgin Galactic. And that's just the rocket companies. You've got Bob Bigelow, who's building habitats, actual habitats in space.
It's crazy.
So to go back to what we were talking about before, this is developing, this is starting now.
Yeah,
we're just
serious. This is serious.
Cusp.
It's serious.
So you're going to see in the next couple of years that rather than NASA, Roscosmos, ESA, European Space Agency, being the predominant player in space, it's going to be private commercial industry. I mean, nobody really, it didn't click. No. Most people, you know, I read the news about space and I'm always fascinated.
You have to see it.
There was a contract, an agreement done by Elon Musk, who's got his rocket company, and Bob Bigelow, who already has most people don't know this, there's 2 private habitats, inflatable habitats, circling the Earth every day right now. By Bob. Nobody's in there just yet, but it's there. And there's a contract between SpaceX and Bob Bigelow to be the launch provider for Bigelow to bring private individuals to these habitats. You want to go on a honeymoon? Well, honey, why don't we just let's go to space. And that's going to happen in the next 10 years. So Richard Branson is going to be one of these first people. You heard of Virgin Galactic. They had an accident last year. It's kind of slowed them down. But you're going to have these 5-minute space flights.
These guys are serious. I mean, these are serious factories and millions of dollars going into these things.
First of all, these people they're passionate about space. That's important. But these are very intelligent and very substantial business people that are not just developing just because of the passion. They want to see a dollar sign at the end of the day, so they're doing this very carefully.
There are some new phrases I think my guests might love, and I'd like you to define them. I mean, I think some of them might be obvious, but I just thought
I learned of one tonight, cosmic law. I've never heard that, but I'm going to use that. I'm a cosmic attorney.
Exactly. I think it would work, by the way. It might be a little bit better than space.
Go
right to cosmic.
I love it.
Orbital jurisdiction means...
Orbital jurisdiction right now doesn't mean anything.
There you go. Doesn't mean a thing.
Yeah.
Space tourism, I can figure. Space tourism liability. Let's talk about space tourism liability, because we're going to start moving to hotels and tourism and what's going on in that industry, because that's also fascinating. Space, so if they die up there or something, whose fault is it, kind of thing? What is the liability? Is the liability they don't come back?
Well, the
Like, you know,
I would
kind of
say
what-
liability is a much bigger question that they don't come back.
Right. They blow up in the ship.
Yeah. Well, you know, nobody's died in space.
I know.
No one's
So-
ever died in space. People have died getting to
Getting
space
there.
and coming back from
So
space.
this was an
But-
interesting, you're working on this.
Yeah,
Space,
well,
tourism, liability.
And everybody so far, generally, up until, you know, there was a couple of private individuals that have been launched to space. Tito was one of the first people who went through Russia. I think he spent $20 or $25 million for that seat, which is
Yeah.
you know, probably the most expensive seat that you've ever bought in your life. But there've only been a handful of private individuals in space. And in terms of space liability, all of that, before these private individuals, they've all been astronauts. So liability was really
Signed off
It was
a
signed
million
off. You're
times.
done.
Yeah.
You belong to the government.
Yeah, yeah,
So
yeah.
now that individuals are going to be launched for 5 minutes into space and even beyond, we're now developing these laws regarding liability. But I would say that
Then
before
you have to have an insurance company there.
I was about to say, before you even talk about liability, who's going to insure you?
Exactly.
So that's, you know, we're talking with insurance companies. Insurance companies are talking to the industry. How do they run numbers in terms of what the numbers are for a premium for an insurance policy?
Well, there's already a subject out there about spacecraft tort. With all of the legal problems we have in the world today, that there actually could be disputes in spacecraft tort.
Yes.
I mean, let's talk about that. What does that mean? What are you disputing?
Well, right now.
I am nothing, I know, but what
right
is
now
the,
we're
what is
talking
the
about-
anticipated dispute?
The
Do you know what I'm saying? Like, these are the conversations that are going on.
So
What are they planning to maybe have a dispute about?
You know, it's funny because there are a number of space attorneys out there, and the majority of those space attorneys really been academic, only because there hasn't been a commercial market, right? So nobody's litigated. There are no cases in terms of
Right.
a spacecraft crashing into another with people on board. So it's really been academic. So there's been what we call law journals, where people just pontificate about, well, if this happens, then this could be the result. So we've got a you know, a nearly limitless number of law journals that have been written in the last 40 years by these space attorneys
Hypothetical
and the
situations.
academic about, so if a spacecraft launches and it falls on the moon, who's responsible in terms of the liability, and then whose jurisdiction is it, and then who's going to pay the. So there's all these issues that I can name you a whole bunch, but nobody even has an answer. There's no one clear, definitive
fascinating.
answer in terms of tort right now in space.
Well, I understand that there is a range of commercial space businesses, including space hotel startups. This is going to be really interesting. Satellite providers and companies focusing on harvesting resources from asteroids, but also building of space tourism and hotels. Can you give us a picture of what that would look like for my guests? Because I think they're going to be filled up if you can afford it. Who wouldn't want to go to a space hotel? I'm signed up.
I'm on.
I'm with you.
Count me
We'll
in.
go. I definitely want to go. I'd be an astronaut tomorrow. I mean, put me in the seat.
I'm with you. So Bob Bigelow, like I talked about before, Bob Bigelow is the first company that is talking about space hotels. And so they have inflatable modules. These inflatable modules are going to house tourists.
More than one. It could be rooms.
Oh, there's going to be more than that. Yeah, there's going to be rooms. And they're actually going to put them on the moon as well.
How much would that cost? I mean, I have here Golden Spike made headlines. I'm taking tourists to the moon for the low price, by the way. For those of you who think our prices are expensive, $1.5 billion.
1.5 billion.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Per
With a B.
traveler. That's with a B. That's
Right.
right. That's with a B. Per traveler, $1.5 billion. Is
Well,
it in
look-
your horizon to be involved with that process? Is there any way that your own company is talking about that?
The space industry is small right now, and we all know each other. We have a working relationship with everybody. On satellites, there are operators of satellites, and these satellites generally last about 12 years, 15 years at the most. It's not that they stop working. They work perfectly well. They just run out of fuel. So they park them in a junkyard orbit, and they can't do anything with them. So one of the first services that we're going to provide is, from the asteroid material, we're going to get fuel. And
Wow.
we're going to be able to fuel these satellites so they can continue to work. 1 month of additional service for these satellites is $20 million of revenue for the operator. So if you can extend that for 1 year, what is the value of that fuel? So satellites, and that also prevents debris from building up in orbit. We're mitigating this debris by using these assets. So the satellite market, we're definitely addressing. The inflatable modules, we're talking with them as well in terms of what their needs are for their own fuels and for their own materials. That's going to be a couple of years down the line, but we're definitely excited to work with them.
Mark Hopkins, a founding member of the Space Development Steering Committee, do you know him?
Sure.
Told Fox News it's a risky venture, but space mining has the potential of restoring the American dream. How can you manage milestones so that you can make your partners and investors happy in this crazy industry that you're going into? I'm sure there are some pretty steep milestones.
So, we have different types of investors. Some of them are looking for short-term revenue. Some are really in the long-term game. The way we generally address investors is the way we address ourselves and how we look at it. And we want to be successful. I think everybody on the team has put their entire life into this. We've been around for 3.5 years. So it's not just necessarily about getting a great return for our investors, which we're definitely focused about, but it's also about fulfilling the dreams that we all have. We're all in it not because we fell into this company. We're all space freaks and geeks. So the milestones that we want to meet for investors is the same milestones that we want to accomplish for ourselves. And one of the first milestones is us launching a spacecraft next year. And we're testing out some of our new systems, our new technologies, water thrusters. We're developing water-based thrusters. So you can actually use the water from the asteroid to fuel these thrusters, and you can continually use these spacecraft for an indefinite period of time. So it's really about, if you sit in on some of these meetings that we have, you would have necessarily sometimes a brain meltdown in terms of the engineering, in terms of the nuances of each particular step that we're taking to meet these milestones. So,
well, that sort of takes it like, how big is big? Like when you sit with your investors and partners who've put money into your company, how big are you saying? What is the future? What's the potential future of a company like this?
Think of it this way. So right now, I'll just break down the mathematics for you in less than a minute. It's $11,000 per pound to lift into orbit. That's a lot. That's a lot of money. So if you want to develop a space infrastructure, it's completely economically unsustainable by bringing everything terrestrially. So you need the resources from space. A 1 meter asteroid is generally about 1 ton. 1 ton is roughly $1 million. There are millions and millions of these asteroids, 15,000 that we know of, some that are 10,000 meters. We know of 6 asteroids that are 10,000 meters in length. Do the math. We're not talking about millions. It's not even billions. We're talking with a T.
Right.
So when you convert that amount of material, and I'm not even just talking about the platinum and the gold, and that's the sexy story. It's really about the water and the nickel to develop these infrastructures. When you have tons and tons and tons of material, as we expand, we're talking about $1 trillion industry.
What's the trajectory then? What's the timeline to get to that kind of level?
So within next year, we're launching our first spacecraft. Within the next 3 years, we're launching our first spacecraft that actually is going to go and explore asteroids. Within the next 7 years, we are going to actually land on an asteroid. Within the next 10 to 12 years, we're actually going to start harvesting that. So you're looking at this industry really developing in full bloom. It's already started, but actually mining the asteroids and converting those asteroids into material within the next 10 to 15 years.
Wow. You must have one of the most exciting jobs. But it must be also hard because you're creating something that's not there.
I would say it's a blessing. This job is really a blessing in many ways. In many ways, it's a 7-day-a-week job. Ask my wife. So she might not see it as a blessing, but I feel like I'm on the legal frontier of the frontier. For my personality, that works great. So it's exciting to work in a vacuum, pardon the pun.
Yeah.
It's exciting to work in a legal vacuum We're actually creating these laws. We're developing a new industry that's never been around.
That's so exciting.
And it's that industry that's going to allow humans to catapult into it's going to be a new sensory perception. The very fact that within the next 10
lifetime,
to
for
20
sure.
years,
Absolutely.
people are actually going to be going to space.
I know, it's our lifetime. You know, at the end of all of our interviews, which I just love these, right guys? We just love to do this. We learn so much every single week, just fun stuff. I'm sure if I had a trivia question, we could actually win, hands down. We always ask our guests to provide a golden nugget. This will be an interesting one for you, for sure. And a golden nugget is something that you can leave our guests, a piece of information or something that helps them or something. What would be your golden nugget for our guests?
The golden nugget. So I'm not going to say any intellectual property golden nuggets because I would say that the way we perceive ourselves as humanity is going to change dramatically within the next 10 years. Humans are humans, and we have our emotions and we have our ups and downs, but the way we perceive life is going to change simply because our spatial distances and ability is going to change as well. And I think that once we actually start going to space and we start seeing this very small blue dot in a very big black canvas, and we start realizing that we're all in it together, and that Republican, Democrat, white, black, the United States, Europe, we'll start realizing those boundaries will start getting a little fuzzier. And when that starts happening, it is my hope and dream that our going to space will start, our going to outer space will start refocusing on the way we're looking at the inner space in humanity within ourselves and questioning why we're here and what we're here to do in general.
That's a great golden nugget. I hope you had as much fun as I had tonight, because I think this is fun. You have to come back.
Thank you for inviting me.